Story number 1. The Shadow of Bigfoot. They say the ancient forests of the Pacific Northwest can swallow you whole, that the towering pines and thick ferns hold secrets older than humankind. People talk about the rain, the endless drizzle, how the gloom creeps into your bones. But for me, it wasn't the rain that haunted me long after I left Olympia. It was the night in those woods, the night my friends and I came face to face with something monstrous, something beyond the simple legend of a towering ape-man. It was the night we learned Bigfoot is far from a solitary cryptid. It is the leader of an entire hidden species, territorial, vengeful, eager to drive out or devour any who stray too close. My name is Hunter Keller, and I used to be a skeptic. Growing up in Yakima, Washington, I'd heard the Bigfoot tales, grocery store tabloids with fuzzy photos, roadside attractions claiming footprints. I found it all silly, folk stories for gullible tourists. So when my friends suggested a camping trip to the heart of the Olympia forest, rumored hotbed of Sasquatch sightings, I laughed at the idea. But I love the outdoors, and the chance to get away for a weekend was too good to pass up. Besides, I thought it might be fun to tease them about finding Bigfoot. There were 4 of us, me, obviously, my best friend, Will, who orchestrated the trip, Sasha, a biology grad student hoping to gather samples for her field work, and Derek, a local who swore he once saw something huge near his uncle's cabin. The plan was simple: drive into the forest, hike a few miles in, set up camp by a scenic creek, roast marshmallows, maybe share ghost stories around the fire. We even joked we'd see footprints or hear strange calls at night. None of us expected the stories to become horrifying reality. We left on a Friday afternoon in late October, the perfect time for crisp weather and relatively fewer mosquitoes. The roads grew narrower as we approached the deep forest, ancient cedars looming on either side. Sasha kept scanning the tree line, eyes bright with curiosity. Will hummed along to a folksy tune on the radio. Derek cracked jokes about tree knocks and Sasquatch calls. I felt a tingle of excitement, the promise of an exhilarating weekend. We parked at a small trailhead, loaded our packs, and set off down a winding path. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, turning the mossy floor vibrant green. The forest felt alive, every step releasing the damp smell of earth and decay, every breeze rustling pine needles overhead. After about 2 hours, we found a clearing near a stream. Perfect campsite, flat ground, a ring of stones for a fire pit, and enough coverage from the trees to shelter us from the drizzle. We pitched 2 tents, Will and Derek in one, Sasha and me in the other. By the time we finished, dusk approached, the sky a dull gray. The forest hush grew heavier, that peculiar quiet of remote woods. We built a small fire, using logs from the area. Flames crackled, and we relaxed, passing around a flask of whiskey. Derek told more stories about local sightings, footprints the size of dinner plates, strange howls echoing at midnight. Sasha half laughed, half listened intently, hoping to glean any real clues. Will teased me about being a believer by the trip's end. I just rolled my eyes, though part of me felt uneasy. The forest does that, makes you second-guess your bravado. Night fell, the temperature dropping sharply. The flame danced, sparks popping into the inky darkness. We grilled some hot dogs, rummaged for S. Morey's fixings. Then Sasha shushed us. Listen. We paused, heart-stumping. From far away came a faint whistle or moan, like wind through distant pines. Might just be the wind, Will said, but none of us sounded sure. After another hour of idle chatter, we decided to turn in. Inside the tent, I snuggled into my sleeping bag, the ground cold beneath me. Sasha typed notes on her phone about local flora she'd identified. We joked a bit about Bigfoot peeking into the tent at night. But eventually, exhaustion won out. The forest lulled us with the murmur of the stream, the occasional hoot of an owl. Despite the creeping cold, I drifted off. I woke sometime later, uncertain of the hour. The fire was low, the campsite dim except for the glow of embers. My breath condensed in the freezing air. And then I heard it, a soft thump, like a heavy step on damp ground. Another. Another. My pulse quickened. Might be a deer, I told myself. Or a black bear. I rummaged for my flashlight, unzipping the tent flap an inch to peek out. The silhouettes of the trees swayed gently in the breeze, the fire reduced to faint coals. No movement in the clearing. Then a shape flickered at the edge of my vision, near a cluster of ferns. Tall, broad. Fear roiled in my gut. I blinked, straining to see. Nothing. Or maybe it had melted into the gloom. I listened for more steps, but only the sigh of wind. After a tense minute, I withdrew, zipping the flap. Probably my imagination. I tried to calm my racing heart, eventually slipped back into uneasy sleep. Morning brought a weak sun, lighting dew-soaked ferns. We stumbled out, yawning. Derek was first to notice the footprints, enormous impressions in the muddy soil behind our tents, leading off into the trees. Each print was easily 18 inches long, half that wide, with distinct toe-like shapes at the top. My stomach flipped at the sight. Sasha crouched, photographing them, excitement warring with fear in her eyes. "These are huge," she breathed. "And fresh." Will frowned, running a hand over his stubble. Could it be a hoax? Or we're all half asleep? But the prints were undeniably real. The stride distance was massive, at least 4 feet between steps. The prints circled around the tents, as if something walked near us in the night. Dread prickled my skin. Still, we tried to rationalize. Maybe a local playing a prank, wearing fake Bigfoot shoes. But we were miles from any road, and who'd hike in a storm just to scare us? Sasha insisted she'd collect plaster casts. So after breakfast, she poured plaster into a few of the clearest prints, letting it set. Meanwhile, Derek and I found more prints leading deeper into the woods. They appeared fresh. We followed them a short distance but lost them in thick undergrowth. Something about the area felt oppressive, the forest quieter than before. Eventually, we headed back to camp to help Sasha with the plaster. She finished by noon, peeling out a perfect cast of a monstrous footprint. I felt goosebumps seeing it up close. We spent the afternoon collecting firewood, half expecting more footprints or sightings, but nothing occurred. The tension hung in the air, though. We'd speak in hushed tones, scanning the tree line. Once or twice, I thought I saw movement beyond the ferns, but it might have been illusions. By dusk, we built up a bigger fire, hoping to keep wildlife away. None of us wanted to mention Bigfoot. Too unsettling. That second night is when everything unraveled. The weather turned sour, a drizzle spitting from low clouds. We huddled around the fire, each lost in anxious thoughts. Sasha fiddled with her camera, checking pictures of the footprints. Derek poked the flames with a stick. Will tried to lighten the mood with a story about a campground fiasco from childhood, but none of us laughed. The shadows stretched long, dancing around the campsite. A sense of watchfulness pressed on me, like we were being observed from all sides. Close to midnight, we decided to turn in, craving the illusion of safety in our tents. Will doused the fire while Derek rummaged in the cooler. Sasha muttered about organizing her gear. I stepped to the edge of the clearing, shining a flashlight into the gloom, scanning for any sign of those monstrous footprints again. That's when I heard a low rumble or growl, impossible to place. My blood ran cold. "Guys?" I called. The growl repeated, echoing from multiple directions. Derek cursed under his breath. "Is that a bear?" But it wasn't. The tone was deeper, almost vocal. Then a series of knocks, like someone pounding a tree trunk, knock, knock, knock. Sasha's eyes widened. "Bigfoot calls," she whispered shakily. "They do with knocks, so I've read." My gut twisted. Another round of knocks answered from the other side of the clearing. We were surrounded. Panic flared. We raced to gather our essentials, zipping up gear. "We gotta get out of here," Will panted, eyes darting. But our cars were 3 miles back, no direct road, just a winding trail. We could try fleeing in the dark, but what if these creatures gave chase? The knocks came again, closer. Then an unholy shriek tore through the night, like a cross between a roar and a banshee wail. My hair stood on end. We froze, hearts pounding. A massive silhouette emerged at the far edge of the clearing, lit by the faint glow of our dying fire. It stood at least 8 feet tall, broad shoulders, covered in dark fur. The head was conical, the arms long. My mind reeled, Bigfoot. It was real, and it was furious we were on its land. Slowly, it advanced, a guttural growl rumbling from its chest. Derek let out a strangled yelp. Will whispered, "Oh God! Oh God!" Sasha gripped my arm so tightly it hurt. Then, beyond it, more shapes stirred, smaller but similarly upright, eyes glinting with malevolent curiosity. A tribe, a clan, an entire group. My throat constricted with terror. We had nowhere to run. The alpha Bigfoot towered in front, glaring at us with an intelligence far beyond an animal. Sasha fumbled for a camera, but I yanked her arm. "Don't provoke it," I hissed. She hesitated, tears in her eyes. The alpha let out another shriek, raising its arms as if commanding the others. Then in a blur of movement, they spread out, encircling our campsite. The ring of hairy silhouettes closed in, each hissing or growling, their huge feet crunching the ferns. My heart hammered. We brandished sticks, anything, though it felt laughably inadequate. Suddenly, the alpha lunged. Derek swung a burning branch from the fire, scorching the creature's fur. It howled, reeling back, giving us a split second. "Run!" Sasha cried. We bolted, slipping past a gap in the ring. The creatures snarled behind us. We tore through the brush, branches whipping our faces. The darkness was claustrophobic, our flashlights bouncing wildly. In my periphery, I saw shapes bounding between trees, flanking us. They could outrun us easily, toying with us. Panting, we stumbled across a small creek, wading through the icy water. The creatures howled, halting briefly at the bank. Maybe they disliked crossing water. We used the chance to push further. Derek was limping, he'd twisted his ankle. We half-dragged him along. Another monstrous shriek tore the night, so close it made my ears ring. The alpha had crossed upstream or downstream, blocking our path. We found ourselves in a small clearing. The moon peeked through clouds, revealing a circle of twisted pines. The alpha emerged from behind a trunk, silent as a shadow. Its eyes gleamed with savage intelligence. Then behind us, the rest of the creatures stepped out, forming a half-ring. We were cornered. My lungs burned. Sasha muttered a desperate apology, or prayer. Will brandished a hunting knife, face pale. The alpha stood tall, chest heaving, exuding a primal fury. This wasn't a curious ape, this was the leader of a monstrous species that guarded its realm with lethal intent. Time seemed to slow. The alpha bared fangs, raising an arm, about to strike. Then, from a distance, a single gunshot cracked the air. The creatures froze, heads whipping around. Another shot rang out, echoing. A distant spotlight cut through the trees. The creatures hissed, uncertain. The alpha snarled, turning to gauge this new threat. That moment gave us an opening. "Go!" Derek gasped. We pelted away from the clearing, spurred by the flicker of that spotlight. The Bigfoot clan roared in anger, but we were gone, ducking under branches, stumbling over roots, following the faint beam. We emerged onto a logging road, where a battered old pickup idled, headlights blazing. A wiry man in a flannel shirt waved us over, rifle in hand. "Get in, quick," he shouted. No time to question. We piled into the truck bed. The man fired another shot into the trees, then floored the gas. The pickup lurched forward, gravel spraying. I glimpsed the alpha charging the road, arms raised. Another gunshot. The alpha reeled away, shrieking. Then we were careening down the track, leaving the creatures behind in a swirl of dust. The man introduced himself as Jonas, a local. Said he'd heard unholy screams echoing across the valley, suspected they were on the hunt again. He'd encountered them before, lost friends to them. We huddled in shock, shivering. Jonas led us to his secluded cabin. There, by the warm glow of a fireplace, we tried to steady our nerves. He insisted we lay low until dawn, then he'd escort us back to a main road. His tone carried dire certainty. Those things rule the forest at night. You cross their territory, you die. Lucky I found you. At sunrise, Jonas kept his word, driving us carefully along back roads until we reached a ranger station. We parted ways, offering stammered thanks. The rangers gave us blankets, listened wide-eyed to our account of an encounter with huge, hairy creatures. They promised an investigation, though their skeptical glances told me they suspected we were either delusional or pranking them. We left phone numbers, but I doubt we'll ever see official confirmation. Back in civilization, we parted. Sasha, with trembling hands, mailed her plaster footprints to a lab, though I suspect they'll go missing or be dismissed as a hoax. Derek's ankle slowly healed, but psychologically, he's withdrawn, nightmares plaguing him. Will tries to crack jokes about the hairy bogeyman, but his eyes reveal lingering fear. And me? I can't shake the memory of that monstrous alpha, the leader of a hidden clan far from myth. Bigfoot isn't a solitary gentle giant, it's the apex predator of a savage tribe, fiercely defending its domain. Now, when the winter storms blow across Olympia, I recall that night. I see the circle of creatures in the moonlight, hear the alphas roar. The forest is vast, and deep within, something monstrous lurks. If you ever wander those shadowy trails near Olympia, Washington, keep your senses sharp. Because if you see footprints bigger than your head, or hear knocks in the night, it might not be a friendly curiosity. You could be trespassing in the land of the real Bigfoot, a cunning, vengeful guardian with a clan at its back. And the last thing you'll hear might be that unholy shriek before they close in, leaving the snow-stained red under the silent pines. Story number 2. Beasts of the Appalachian Range. I've always found solace in solitude, especially deep in the mountains. There's something about the hush of wind through the pines, the interplay of sunlight and shadow across rugged slopes, that makes me feel more alive than any city street ever could. But if there's one thing I learned on my last solo trek through the Appalachian Range, it's that solitude can turn on you. Out there, alone among ancient ridges and silent hollows, you might not be as alone as you think. My name is Jason Bell. I'm 32, a freelance graphic designer by trade. But whenever my schedule permits, I sling on a backpack and seek out the wild places. Something about the Appalachians calls to me. Maybe it's the history in those hills, the old folk tales whispered in small-town diners about ghosts and hidden critters. The cynic in me dismissed them as local color. That was before I came face-to-face with something that defied everything I thought I knew. This all happened in late November, just before Thanksgiving. I'd planned a 4-day hike through a lesser-used section of the Appalachian Trail, cutting across some steep ravines and dense woodland near southwestern Virginia. The weather was cold but clear, perfect for a final trek before winter storms made it treacherous. I packed my gear meticulously: tent, stove, enough food for 5 days, emergency supplies, the usual. My phone had some offline maps, though coverage would be spotty. Good enough. I craved that isolation, the quiet that only the deep woods can offer. I started at dawn from a small trailhead off a winding country road. A battered sign read "Trail not maintained. Enter at own risk." I remember smiling at that. I'd done some borderline reckless hikes before, always managed fine. The first day was idyllic: crisp air, the trail coated with a thin layer of frost, leaves crunching underfoot. I felt that familiar rush of being out in the wild. No cars, no email, just me and the earth breathing. Late afternoon, I spotted a rock overhang near a stream and decided to make camp. I set up my small tent on relatively flat ground, the creeks gurgle a soothing soundtrack. Darkness fell quickly, as it does in the valleys of the Appalachians. The temperature plummeted. I huddled in my sleeping bag early, a can of chili warming on my tiny stove. The night was calm, full of starlight threading through barren treetops. Sometime around midnight, I woke. At first, I thought the wind or an animal passing had roused me. But the forest was eerily still, no wind, no rustle. Then I heard it, a low, distant grunt or moan, carried on the cold air. My heart beat faster. Could be a black bear. They roam these hills, though they usually avoid humans. I fumbled for my headlamp, unzipped the tent an inch. The darkness outside pressed close. Another grunt, slightly louder. I told myself it was far off, that in the mountains, sound can carry strangely. Eventually, I drifted back to a fitful sleep. By dawn, the night noises felt like a dream. I ate a quick breakfast, broke camp, and pushed deeper. The trail, if you could call it that, was faint, often just a suggestion of a path. Twice I had to consult my offline map. The forest grew denser, pines giving way to hemlocks. Around midday, I reached a ridge offering a spectacular view of rolling hills, the horizon lost in a haze of distant peaks. The sense of freedom was intoxicating. Yet I couldn't shake the faint unease from the night before. That afternoon, the trail descended into a narrow hollow. The trees pressed in on both sides. No sunlight reached the floor, a perpetual twilight. The quiet was absolute, no birdsong, no scurrying squirrels, just my footfalls on the damp leaves. That's when I sensed it, an odd pressure, like eyes on my back. I paused, scanning the undergrowth. Nothing. The sense of being watched persisted. My skin prickled. I pressed on, forcing a shrug, telling myself paranoia gets the best of any solo hiker. An hour later, I nearly tripped over something, a large footprint in the soft earth, partially hidden by leaves. I knelt, brushing them aside. The shape was huge, easily twice the size of my foot, with distinct toe impressions. For a crazy second, my mind whispered, Bigfoot? But I dismissed it. Probably a bear stepping at an angle, or maybe I was misreading. Still, the hair on my arm stood up. I decided to keep moving. Near sundown, I found a patch of level ground by a fallen cedar, good for camp. I set up quickly, built a small fire. The temperature was dropping fast, the sky tinted a purplish hue. As I heated my dinner, I realized the forest was too quiet again, no crickets, no owls, just stillness. The memory of that footprint gnawed at me. I told myself I was being childish, letting stories spook me. But it's hard to ignore your gut when it's screaming something's off. That night, I bolted awake to a snapping twig. My entire body tensed. This time, the sound came from somewhere close, maybe 20 or 30 yards away. I grabbed my flashlight, hard hammering. Another snap, then a scuffle, like heavy weight shifting on damp ground. My mind raced. Bear, elk, mountain lion? The silhouette outside my tent from the moonlight was broad, upright. My breath caught. If it was a bear, it'd be on all fours, or at least rummaging. This shape was tall. My throat went dry. A rustle of leaves, then silence. I forced myself to speak. Hello? Anyone out there? My voice shook. No answer. A faint grunt, almost a sigh, drifted through the darkness. Then the shape moved off. I stayed crouched, flashlight in hand, for what felt like hours before exhaustion claimed me. In the morning, I found fresh footprints circling the camp. Massive prints, like the one I'd seen before, but clearer. My head spun. They formed a perimeter, as though something had walked all around me, observing. My mouth went dry. My rational mind shrieked that some local or a real giant was messing with me. But these prints had a stride too long for an average human. And the forest was so remote. I decided to push forward, planning to cut my trip a day short, find a direct route back to my car. This was no normal wildlife encounter. As I hiked, the feeling of being watched intensified. Every rustle in the brush set my nerves on edge. At one point, I heard a faint whoop-whoop echoing between the trees. Then an answering call from another direction. I froze in mid-step, goosebumps prickling my neck. Something was communicating, intelligent. My mind flitted to all those cryptid shows people mock. But I was living it. At a small stream crossing, I caught a glimpse of movement up the slope, a tall figure darting behind a tree. A fleeting look at thick, dark fur, impossibly broad shoulders. Fear spiked my adrenaline. A Bigfoot, or something like it, apparently shadowing me. I tried to remain calm, crossing the stream quickly, eyes scanning for more. That's when I saw a second figure, on the opposite bank, crouched among the ferns. It clicked, I wasn't dealing with a lone creature. There were at least two, maybe more. And they seemed to be coordinating. I pressed on, pace brisk, cursing under my breath. My sense of direction wavered as the forest thickened. The terrain turned rugged, steep slopes and hidden ravines. Each time I tried to follow my offline map, the trail I found would vanish. It was as if the land itself conspired to confuse me. I realized with creeping horror that maybe these creatures understood the terrain intimately, hurting me deeper. By afternoon's end, I was thoroughly lost. My phone battery trickled away, no signal to be found. The whoops and knocks echoed intermittently, too. At times, I'd catch fleeting shapes among the trees, an arm, a shoulder, a flash of fur. They never confronted me directly. Not yet. But their presence squeezed my chest with dread. Darkness approached again, and I had no choice but to camp. My body ached, my mind exhausted. That fourth night was pure terror. I built no fire, hoping to remain inconspicuous. But the creatures approached regardless. I heard them circling, strange guttural noises. Then came the howls, long, mournful wails that sounded half human, half animal. My blood froze. I gripped my hunting knife, hands trembling. Something large brushed against the side of my tent, the canvas bulging inward. I stifled a scream, slashing out blindly. The shape withdrew with a hiss. Then a chorus of roars erupted around me. My heart nearly gave out. In desperation, I burst from the tent, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. Shadows flitted at the edges of the beam, tall, fur-covered beings, eyes glinting. 4, 5, maybe 6 of them. The biggest, presumably the alpha, stood ahead, towering easily 8 feet tall. Its face, lit by the dim beam, was leathery and ape-like, but with undeniable cunning in those eyes. It let out a guttural bark, and the others spread out, forming a half-circle. They were corralling me. No point fighting a half-dozen giant creatures. So I ran. I sprinted between 2 smaller beasts before they could close ranks, adrenaline fueling me. Branches whipped my face. I tripped, nearly fell, but forced myself up, panting. Behind me, I heard thunderous footfalls. They could outrun me easily, but it seemed they enjoyed the chase, letting me dash blindly through the dark. The ground sloped downward, my flashlight bobbing erratically. I realized my path led into a rocky ravine, no easy way out. They herded me there deliberately. I was the hunted. I crashed into a boulder, pain jolting my shoulder. My flashlight clattered away, leaving me in near total darkness. Panic seized me. Scrabbling for the flashlight, I found it battered, flickering. The footfalls drew closer, accompanied by low growls. Then my beam caught a third figure above me on the ridge, blocking escape. Everywhere I turned, monstrous silhouettes. Despair wrapped around my chest. Then something unexpected, the creatures paused, growling at each other. A series of knocks sounded from deeper in the ravine, like another group calling. My tormentors hesitated, their attention divided. With that precious moment, I scrambled behind a fallen log, crouching amid the rotted wood. The alpha let out a sharp bark, sending 2 of them jogging off toward the new knocks. The rest turned their attention back to me, but in that confusion, I wormed my way deeper under the log, finding a narrow gap in the rocks behind. A crude cave, maybe. I squeezed in, ignoring splinters. The creatures roared, tearing at the logs above me. I slithered deeper, scraping my arms, my pack snagging. Finally, I found an interior chamber, big enough to curl up. My flashlight flickered, revealing jagged rock walls. The beasts clawed at the entrance, but the gap was too small for them to fit. Their shrieks reverberated. The alpha hammered on the logs, shaking the entire makeshift den. Terror tightened my chest. But they couldn't reach me. Yet. The night stretched into a nightmare of pounding and roars, sometimes receding as the creatures responded to calls from elsewhere. In fleeting moments, I half-dozed, only to wake in a jolt as they returned, yowling frustration. My only hope was that at daylight, they might retreat or I might slip away. The hours dragged like years. At dawn's first light, the assault lessened. I waited, heart-thudding, until silence enveloped the forest. Slowly, carefully, I peered out. The clearing beyond was empty. Tracks and churned earth suggested a frenzy of motion, but no beasts in sight. My entire body trembled as I crawled free. The forest was quiet, the morning sun casting angled light through the pines. Blood crusted a cut on my forehead, and my clothes were torn. Summoning all leftover strength, I found my bearings. Thankfully, the rising sun gave me an east-west direction. I knew my car was roughly southeast. I set off, half limping, eyes scanning constantly for movement. My footsteps felt thunderously loud, each snap of a twig setting my nerves aflame. But the creatures didn't show. Maybe they were nocturnal, or maybe they'd moved on. Or perhaps I was just lucky. By midday, I recognized a rock outcrop from the first day's hike. Relief swelled. Another hour, and I spotted the small parking area in the distance. My battered sedan beckoned like a sanctuary. No sign of the beasts behind me. I practically collapsed inside the car, locking the doors. Shaking, I started the engine, half expecting a massive figure to burst from the tree line. But none did. I drove off, wincing at every shadow. Only when I hit the main highway did I feel a semblance of safety. My mind still reeled, replaying those howls, the monstrous silhouette of the alpha's face. This wasn't a single Bigfoot, a weird solitary ape-man. It was a clan of cunning, territorial predators. They used the thick Appalachian terrain like a labyrinth, cornering prey. The idea that they roamed unseen in those hills, masters of stealth, left me rattled to my core. I told no one except a close friend about my ordeal. He suggested calling authorities, but seriously, who'd believe me? He teased me about a meltdown or a bear attack I misinterpreted. But the memory of those footprints, that towering shape blocking my path, that twisted intelligence in its eyes, I can't unsee it. Some nights, I jolt awake from nightmares of them prowling around my tent, cornering me in that ravine. I still love the wilderness, but I'm not as fearless. The Appalachians, for all their splendor, hide ancient secrets older than our modern illusions. Maybe a few local legends ring truer than we want to admit. If you plan a solo trek into the heart of those mountains, I advise caution. Because if you see footprints too large for a man, if you hear what knocks or unearthly howls at night, you might be on their turf. And they aren't shy about defending it. I haven't returned to that corner of southwestern Virginia. My curiosity is overshadowed by the memory of those black-furred shapes darting among the pines. People ask if I believe in Bigfoot now, and I usually shrug, forcing a half-smile. Because it's easier than describing the nightmares of an alpha creature leading a pack, apex predators who see us as trespassers or worse. So maybe you'll head out there someday, convinced you can find footprints, maybe get a shaky cell phone video. Just be ready. Because they're smarter, faster, and they're never alone. One night, you might wake to the sound of branches snapping around your camp, realize the watchers in the dark outnumber you, and understand the truth: the creatures we dismiss as myth are real, cunning, and fiercely territorial. And once you cross paths with them, the forest may never let you go. Story number 3. The White Hunger. I'd been riding snowmobiles around Chugach National Forest for 3 winters running, and I thought I knew it well enough: how to gauge the thickness of the ice on a rushing creek, how to sense the shape of the mountains hidden behind drifts of swirling snow. But I learned too late that the Alaskan backcountry has corners far darker and more cunning than any man can anticipate. That cold night in the Chugach Range, I found out that some avalanches aren't accidents of nature. Sometimes, they're traps. My name is Wyatt Parker. I'm 38, originally from Fairbanks, though I spent enough time in Anchorage to know my way around the region. That weekend, I'd set out on my snowmobile for a short, 2-night ride through the southwestern edge of Chugach. There was a cabin I knew, an old forestry shack near a frozen lake, where I planned to rest, fish through the ice, maybe clear my head away from the city's relentless clamor. The first day was perfect. The sky was a cloudless expanse of pale blue, the low sun glinting off endless fields of white. I carved a neat path through wide valleys, passing clusters of black spruce heavy with snow. The air had that crisp hush that only Alaska can give you, like the silence is older than time. Just me, my machine, and the quiet allure of the wilderness. I reached the shack by late afternoon. Its walls were half buried in drifts, the door stiff with ice. Inside, it smelled of old wood smoke and was nearly as cold as outside, but I had a portable heater and a pile of tinder. Soon, I had a modest fire roaring in the old iron stove. By dusk, I was sitting on a rickety stool, sipping coffee from a thermos, and watching the stars slowly blink to life through the warped window. Sleep came easily. But in the dead of night, something woke me. At first, I thought it was just a gust of wind rattling the shack's walls. But as I surfaced from sleep, I heard a low, throbbing rumble, deeper and more deliberate than the average gale. For a second, I panicked, imagining an avalanche in the distance. Then the sound faded, and I dozed off again, telling myself it was just the shifting glaciers echoing through the mountains. At dawn, I ventured out, intent on an exploratory ride. The plan was to circle around a nearby ridgeline, maybe snap some photos, then come back, break down camp, and head further east before nightfall. The morning weather was mild, the snow sparkling, my snowmobile's engine purring. 10 miles from the shack, I detoured into a narrow valley that looked scenic. The peaks around me soared, their slopes glinting under the sun's weak winter light. As I maneuvered past a stand of alders, a sudden crack reverberated overhead. I jerked my head up in time to see a curtain of white hurtling down the slope, an avalanche. Panic ignited in my veins. I gunned the throttle, but the avalanche's leading edge slammed into the valley floor. The snowmobile lurched, nearly throwing me off. A wave of powder, ice chunks, and debris cascaded across the valley's exit, sealing it behind me. Another torrent roared across the path ahead, forming a massive snow berm that effectively sealed me in from the other direction. My heart hammered. The avalanche had come from 2 directions, meeting in the valley floor to trap me. The improbable timing rattled me. How often do 2 avalanches converge at once, neatly blocking both ends of a valley? The rational mind says it's freak coincidence. A deeper instinct told me it was anything but chance. I dismounted, surveying the barriers of snow. The walls were easily 20 feet high, massive accumulations of ice and debris. Climbing them would be suicidal, especially alone, with the risk of shifting pockets that could bury me alive. I cursed under my breath. My best bet was to head uphill, see if there was a narrow pass or side route. Failing that, I might wait for rescue. But no one knew precisely where I'd roamed. The Forest Service might not spot me for days, especially in winter. A chill deeper than the Alaskan cold settled in my gut. I hopped back on the snowmobile, scanning my GPS. No signal. This area had spotty coverage at best, the battery half drained anyway. I revved the engine, started climbing the slope on the far side. The machine growled as we ascended, my breath fogging inside my helmet. The wind picked up, swirling stinging flakes. Then, out of nowhere, the motor sputtered. I cursed, fiddling with the throttle. The snowmobile coughed, died. I nearly pitched face first into the snow. Mechanically, the machine seemed fine, with fuel in the tank. So why? My mind reeled. I tried restarting, it refused. I suspected jammed lines or frozen components. It would take time to fix, if I even could. The wind howled, and I realized I was extremely exposed on the slope. I decided to push the snowmobile downhill, find a flatter spot to attempt a repair, or maybe retreat to the shack. Except the avalanche had blocked my route back. The path was gone, replaced by a jagged pile of ice. My only choice was to cut across the slope in a wide arc, hopefully around the debris. So I began trudging, dragging the snowmobile while cursing my ill luck. The wind stung my cheeks, the sky thickening with cloud, hinting at more snow to come. The sense of dread returned, a gnawing feeling that something orchestrated this. Ridiculous, I told myself. Avalanches aren't conspiracies. I was maybe half a mile from the valley floor when I spotted footprints in the fresh snow. Massive footprints. Each at least 18 inches long, 5 wide. My blood froze. The toes were splayed, suggesting a barefoot creature, which made no sense in sub-zero temperatures. I'd heard Bigfoot tales in Alaska, of course. Everybody has. But I never believed them. Yet here were the tracks, fresh enough that no drift had covered them. My mind reeled. My breath rasped in the sudden hush. The footprints led along the slope, then vanished among boulders. A line from an old rumor flitted across my mind. They drive prey into dead-end valleys, where it's easier to kill them. The hair on my arm stood up. I forced myself to keep moving, but now I constantly scanned the ridges, expecting to see a hulking shape. The wind carried a faint stench, a musky odor I couldn't place. 30 minutes later, I found the slope ended in sheer cliff. No route forward. My heart sank. The storm was intensifying, the light dimming. I needed shelter. The avalanche effectively caged me in this bowl between mountain walls. Maybe I could find a rocky overhang. Grimly, I left the snowmobile behind, grabbing essential supplies from it: food, small stove, sleeping bag, the little two-person emergency tent. Then I pressed on foot, adrenaline fueling me. As dusk fell, I stumbled across a half-collapsed cave or crevice. The opening was narrow, but inside was enough space to at least block the wind. I shuddered at the thought of predators. But freezing outside was no better. I crawled in, set up the tent loosely to create a windbreak. My flashlight's beam danced on rough stone. The space smelled stale, but no immediate sign of animal dens. I settled in, heart pounding. The day's events battered me. I dozed, half delirious with stress. In the black of night, something awoke me, a deep rumbling from outside. Not thunder. More like a guttural growl. My pulse raced. Slowly, I unzipped the tent, peering out. The cave entrance opened onto the slope. A swirl of wind-driven snow limited my visibility to maybe 10 feet. Then lightning flickered across the stormy sky, momentarily illuminating a shape in front of the cave. My blood turned to ice. It was massive, 8 or 9 feet tall, covered in thick, dark fur clumped with ice. The eyes glowed faintly amber in the lightning's flash. It crouched as if sniffing the air, big arms resting on its knuckles, giving it a vaguely gorilla-like posture. But something about its face was more human than an ape. The wind carried that foul musky odor, intensifying. My heart hammered so loud I feared it'd hear me. Then the creature let out a grunt, stepping closer. It blocked half the cave entrance. I cowered in the gloom, hugging the tent floor. My mind shrieked, Bigfoot. Only it was bigger, more menacing than any cryptid story. The creature lifted its head, letting out a low moan. Another responding call echoed from the slope below. My terror spiked. There were more. The creature bared its teeth, exhaling mist. Then, as if deciding, it turned and lumbered away into the storm. I didn't dare move until dawn. My entire body shook with adrenaline come down. The knowledge that multiple giant hominids roamed the area, orchestrating avalanches, weighed on me. The legend about them driving prey into traps, maybe it was real. Possibly that avalanche had been triggered on purpose, forcing me into their domain. They were cunning, territorial, seeing humans as intruders or worse, prey. By morning's weak light, the storm eased, though the cold remained brutal. I emerged from the cave. No sign of the Bigfoot in the immediate area, but fresh tracks circled near the entrance. I realized with horror how easily it could have reached me if it wanted. Why it spared me, I couldn't guess. Perhaps it was waiting for something, an opportunity to herd me further? Determined to escape, I decided to climb the avalanche debris, risking any hidden pockets. I had climbing rope, an ice axe. If I moved carefully, I might crest the barrier and descend the other side. So I trudged back to the valley floor, scanning constantly for movement. The sense of eyes on me never left. Now and then, I glimpsed quick shapes in the corner of my vision. They were tailing me, I was sure. Sometimes I heard distant whoops or knocks, signs they were communicating. My heart felt caged in my ribs. Reaching the avalanche's base, I set to work. The snow was compacted, layered with ice blocks. Every footstep threatened to slip or punch through. I hammered the axe in, testing each foothold. Halfway up, I heard a growl behind me. I turned. 2 creatures, smaller than the alpha, but still huge, hovered near the bottom. They had the same thick fur, powerful limbs. My stomach lurched. If they wanted, they could yank me down with minimal effort. Instead, they stood watch, heads tilting, letting out guttural calls. Like they were studying me. I forced myself to climb faster. The slope turned steeper near the top, and I nearly lost my grip. A chunk of ice dislodged, sending me sliding a few feet. The creatures let out excited snarls, stepping closer. With a final burst of effort, I scrambled over the crest, half collapsing on the top. The plateau of snow extended a ways, then dropped off on the far side. I exhaled in relief but also dread. I needed to safely descend, which might be even harder. Carefully, I began picking my way down. Mid-descent, a roar exploded from below, another avalanche? My nerves frayed. But the rumble was smaller, not a full avalanche. I craned my neck, glimpsing one of the creatures shoving a giant block of snow from an overhang above me. They were actively trying to dislodge fresh slides. My panic soared. The hillside rumbled, more snow shifting. I had to hurry. Somehow, adrenaline propelled me. I half ran, half slid, narrowly avoiding a cascade of sliding snow. My arms ached from gripping the axe. One misstep, and I'd be buried. The creature's howls echoed, fueling my desperation. Then, with a final leap, I landed on more stable ground beyond the slope, stumbling into a stand of pines. My body screamed from exertion, but I was past the avalanche barrier at least. No time to rest. The creatures likely could climb or circumvent the slope as well. I had to find my route back to the main trail. My sense of direction jumbled, but I recalled the approximate heading. I pressed on through the trees, each breath pluming in the cold air, scanning for any sign of pursuit. Dusk found me stumbling upon the original path, near where I'd left my small car days ago. Relief nearly brought tears. The forest's hush pressed in, but I sensed the presence receding, as if the creatures wouldn't cross beyond their territory. Maybe the roads, the faint human presence, deterred them. I limped out of the wilderness, eventually spotting my car half buried in snowdrifts. The engine fired after some coaxing. With trembling hands, I navigated the snowy forest road, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. I half expected to see a towering shape sprinting after me. But I emerged onto a plowed highway, heart-pounding but safe. In the weeks since, I've told no official source about the Bigfoot clan that hunts humans in the Chugach Hills. Who would believe me? The avalanche might be dismissed as random, the footprints unproven. But I know what I experienced. I have nightmares of that monstrous figure looming at the cave mouth, cunning intelligence in its gaze. The very avalanche that blocked my path was no accident. It was a trap, set by creatures that have learned to manipulate the snowpack, leveraging the mountain's power to corral prey. Now, when I see postcards of Alaskan vistas or read tourist brochures about scenic snowmobile routes, I feel a stab of dread. Because the wilderness is vast, ancient. We assume we're apex predators, but something else roams those snowy ridges, something that hunts with strategy and cunning. If you ever go to Chugach National Forest, heed the avalanche warnings. Some may be man-made, some natural. But sometimes, in the quiet hush of falling snow, it's not just nature. There might be huge, furred hands pushing that snow loose, channeling you deeper into their domain. And if you find footprints too large, or hear distant howls bouncing off the frozen slopes, remember, you're not alone. A tribe of monstrous bipeds, led by an alpha with cunning far beyond any cryptid tale, might just be orchestrating your doom. If you're wise, turn back. Because once you're trapped in their labyrinth of ice and snow, your only salvation might be a desperate climb over shifting drifts, and even then, the ghosts of those savage eyes will haunt your every dream. Story number 4. Shadows in Cherokee Forest. David White had always prided himself on having an impeccable sense of direction. He'd navigated countless backroads in his youth, from the dusty lanes of West Texas to the windy two lanes of upstate New York. So when he got turned around on a family trip through Tennessee, it rattled him more than he'd ever admit. And if he'd known how bad things would get in the Cherokee National Forest, if he'd known what was truly lurking among those ancient pines, he would have turned that SUV around the moment he missed the first turn. It started off as a simple detour. David, his wife Lauren, and their 2 kids, Molly, age 9, and Ben, age 12, were heading home from a wedding in Chattanooga. They decided to take the scenic route through Cherokee National Forest. It was a bright Sunday afternoon, the sun glinting off the tree canopies, the air mild. The kids dozed in the back seat, lulled by the gentle mountain roads. All was well, until David took one wrong fork, then another. Soon, they realized they were hopelessly off route, on a winding gravel path that the GPS refused to recognize. "That's weird," David muttered, tapping his phone's map app. The screen just showed a gray emptiness. No signal, no roads. "Probably just a dead zone," Lauren said, though she sounded uneasy. The deeper they went, the narrower the road grew, barely a single lane carved through thick forest, branches scraping the car's sides. Late afternoon light slanted through the trees, turning to gold and then to a muted gray. The kids woke, blinking in confusion as the SUV jostled over rocks. "Dad, are we lost?" Molly asked, voice small. David forced a reassuring smile. "Just a bit turned around, sweet pea. We'll find the main road soon." But an hour later, dusk crept in, and the forest offered no sign of letting them out. The winding gravel lane occasionally split into smaller spurs, unmarked. David guessed each time, frustration mounting. Tension crackled. Lauren repeatedly tried her phone, no luck. The kids grew whiny, hungry. Anxiety simmered in David's gut. Night fell as a thick hush enveloped the woods. The temperature dropped, a faint breeze rustling the pines. Headlights carved weak cones of visibility through swirling dust. "We need to find a place to turn around or get help," Lauren whispered. David nodded, scanning for any driveway or sign of life. But the gloom concealed everything beyond the beam's reach. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from the roadside, something heavy smashing through branches. David slammed the brakes on reflex. The SUV jolted to a stop. "What was that?" Ben said, eyes wide. David gripped the wheel, straining to see. The headlights revealed only a swirl of dust, the outlines of gnarled trunks. Another crack sounded, followed by a low, guttural grunt. The hair on David's arms stood up. Possibly a bear or a fallen tree. "Stay calm, kids," Lauren said, though her voice trembled. David eased the vehicle forward again. Then, from nowhere, a massive shape lunged across the headlights, a dark blur, easily 7 or 8 feet tall. A thick arm whipped out, striking the hood with a brutal clang. The SUV rocked, the windshield spiderwebbed from the impact. Lauren screamed, the kids shrieking. David floored the gas. The shape vanished into the blackness, leaving behind an echoing roar. They sped up the track, adrenaline pumping, hearts in their throats. They didn't get far. Just around the next bend, a fallen pine blocked the path, freshly toppled, branches still quivering. Another trunk lay behind them now, as though cut or pushed down, sealing them in. "God," Lauren gasped. "It's trapped us." The realization was ice cold. This wasn't random. Something had actively forced them off. Something big. David clenched the steering wheel, scanning for a way around. No good, trees on either side formed an impenetrable wall. The SUV's front grille smoked from the earlier impact. "Kids, seatbelts off," Lauren instructed, voice taut. "We might have to run if it attacks again." A deep, resonant grunt echoed from the darkness behind them. Another from the side. The children huddled in the back seat, terrified. David's mind whirled. Could it be a bear? But bears don't push down trees with that kind of cunning. And that silhouette, it looked disturbingly upright, built like a giant man. The legends of Bigfoot flickered through David's mind. He'd always dismissed them as nonsense. But his heart hammered with a primal fear. Could it be real? He killed the engine, hearing the hiss of steam. "We can't drive out," he said in a low voice. "We might have to continue on foot." The kids whimpered. Lauren swallowed, hands trembling. "But it's so dark," she said. "We don't even know where we are." A faint metallic clang sounded from the rear of the SUV, as if something was testing the trunk. David grabbed the flashlight from the glove box. "No choice. We can't stay here. If it's trying to breach the car, we're sitting ducks." Another clang, louder. The car rocked. "Okay," David hissed. "Everybody out and quietly. Stick together, we'll head down the road, away from that thing." They nodded. In a frenzy of adrenaline, they unbuckled, yanked the doors open. The cold night air assaulted them as they stumbled onto the gravel. The darkness pressed in, only broken by the SUV's dim taillights and David's single flashlight beam. A heavy silhouette loomed near the trunk, hunched and colossal. The shape whipped around, letting out a guttural roar. In the flicker of brake lights, David glimpsed matted fur, massive arms, eyes reflecting red in the gloom. Lauren screamed, tugging the kids' arms. They fled up the road, away from it. The creature bellowed, smashing the trunk with one blow that shattered the glass. The family sprinted, footsteps crunching. The children sobbed, tears freezing on their cheeks. The father's flashlight danced over the gravel, the beam quivering with each frantic step. Another roar echoed behind them, swiftly answered by another call up ahead. David's chest constricted. More than one? The old Bigfoot rumors suggested solitary beasts, but this sounded like a group, a pack. Fear churned in his gut. After maybe half a mile, they paused, panting. The road meandered through thick pines, no sign of habitation. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and rotting leaves. Then, from the darkness to the right, a voice called, "Hey! Over here!" David whipped the flashlight around. "Hello," he croaked. It sounded like a man's voice, distant but urgent. "Help me! I'm lost," it called again. Molly's face brightened with hope. "Dad, someone else is here." But David's blood ran cold. That voice sounded off, hollow, like a bad impersonation of a human voice. He'd heard about cryptids mimicking human speech, some local legends mention it. "It's a trick," he whispered, voice shaking. Lauren's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" David swallowed. "We can't trust it. Stay away." But the voice insisted, "Please help. Over here." The intonation was stilted, repeating the same phrases. "Dad, are we just leaving them if it's real?" Ben asked, tears welling. The father's chest tightened, but his gut screamed this was a lure. Another roar from behind spurred them forward up the road. As they continued, the voice seemed to follow from the right, always just out of sight. "I'm hurt." "Come quick," it cried, but never moved closer. David's stomach churned with dread. This was no human in need, it was something else, copying the lines of a lost hiker to lure them off the path. Then, from the left, a new voice, female, calling, "I found a safe path," in a higher pitch. Molly gasped. "Mom, is that a lady we can trust?" Lauren shook her head, trembling. "No, baby, stay close." The voices grew more frantic, overlapping, as if multiple unseen creatures were calling out in various tones. It was horrifying, like a chorus of mocking echoes, some childlike, some guttural. Suddenly, a shape bounded into the road ahead, lit by the flashlight, another huge, furred figure, different from the first, teeth bared in a snarl. David froze, family huddling behind him. The creature let out a sharp bark, and from behind them, something else answered. They were surrounded. Panicking, David spotted a narrow footpath veering off the main road, disappearing into a cluster of trees. "This way," he shouted. They dashed onto it. The creatures roared, crashing through brush in pursuit. The path twisted, strewn with roots. The family stumbled, adrenaline fueling them. The monstrous footfalls gained, accompanied by rustling leaves and snapped branches. In the thick of the chase, the voices resumed, human-like calls from multiple sides, urging them to stop, "We can help," or "Over here, you're going the wrong way." The kids sobbed in terror, but David forced them onward, ignoring the mimicry. He felt nauseous, realization hitting him. These beings were Bigfoot, yes, but not solitary or docile. They were predators using cunning tactics, herding them deeper, coaxing them off the road with illusions of help. The path ended abruptly at a steep ravine. The moonlight revealed a rocky drop, maybe 15 feet. Lacking options, they slid down carefully, scraping hands. The beasts howled above, but seemed hesitant to follow down the rocky slope. That gave the family a moment's respite. At the ravine bottom, a small creek trickled. They splashed across, hearts pounding. Now, in a dense hollow, the only route seemed to be a faint deer trail winding among boulders. They followed it, limbs shaking from cold and fear. Hours felt like minutes. At intervals, distant roars echoed, the clan tracking them. The kids were near collapse, tears freezing on their cheeks. Lauren coaxed them along, voice quivering with forced calm. David's mind raced, if only they could find a cabin, a ranger station, anything. Eventually, near dawn, they emerged into a clearing. The sky's first light revealed a logging road. Relief surged in David's chest. If they followed it, maybe it'd lead to a main route or a campsite with help. They trudged along, forcing their exhausted legs to keep moving. The kids practically sleepwalked. Just as hope rose, the alpha creature appeared at the road's bend, a massive silhouette blocking their path, shoulders hunched. It gave a mighty roar, eyes burning with territorial rage. The children screamed. Another shape flanked from the side, smaller but still formidable. The family was cornered, pinned between the alpha and its subordinate. Lauren sobbed, pulling the kids close. David, hard-hammering, stooped, grabbed a fallen branch, brandishing it like a spear. Futile, but all he had. The alpha advanced, fists clenched. Then, in a twisted parody of a human voice, it rasped, "No, further." The words were halting, guttural, like it had stolen them from a dying hiker once. The effect was more horrifying than if it had roared. A final snarl, and the alpha lunged. David thrust the branch, but the beast battered it aside with monstrous strength. He stumbled, nearly toppling. The kids screamed. The smaller beast circled, eyes gleaming. The alpha roared, bearing down on them. This was the end. Suddenly, a shotgun blast cracked the air. The alpha jerked, stumbling back. Another blast rang out, and the smaller beast yelped, retreating into the trees. David turned, stunned. A figure in a ranger uniform stood behind them on the logging road, shotgun smoking, face grim. "Go," the ranger barked. "Keep moving down the road." The alpha snarled, hatred twisting its face, but clearly it recognized the gun's power. It bellowed something that made David's blood run cold. Then it and the smaller beast melted into the forest, letting out furious howls. The ranger hurried the family forward, reloading. Another monstrous roar rattled from behind them, but the ranger fired a warning shot that echoed across the trees. For now, that kept the creatures at bay. They half-jogged down the logging road for a mile until they reached a battered ranger truck. The ranger ushered them in, scanning the tree line. David glimpsed a hairy shape on a ridge, glaring with primal rage. Another shot from the ranger, and it vanished. Inside the truck, the family collapsed in trembling relief. The ranger introduced himself as Officer McLeod, assigned to a remote outpost. He said he'd heard unearthly roars and came investigating. He suspected it was a rogue black bear until he saw the beasts. David recounted the entire ordeal in halting sentences. The ranger listened, face pale. "We get sightings now and then, but never so aggressive. Good thing I arrived." He drove them to a small station miles away, radioing for assistance. A rescue team escorted them back to civilization by evening. The official report they offered, likely black bears, plus a mention of mass hysteria in a storm. David and Lauren knew better. They saw the cunning behind the avalanche, the mimicry that lured them. This was no single cryptid, it was an organized clan of monstrous, apex predators controlling that remote corner of Cherokee National Forest. Weeks later, the kids still had nightmares. They refused to go near woods. Lauren tried therapy to cope with the trauma. David lost himself in restlessness, consumed by guilt that he couldn't protect them better, or that he led them into that trap. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, he replays the moment the alpha spoke a stolen human phrase, "No, further." The memory haunts him, proof that these creatures not only exist but can adapt, mimic, and strategize. He decided never to set foot in those woods again. Whenever he sees a news snippet about missing hikers in Cherokee, his stomach flips. He's certain the beasts remain there, lying in wait, shaping avalanches or toppling trees to strand unsuspecting travelers. Perhaps they strike only rarely, so as not to draw attention. They must keep their territory secret from the masses. But if you look close enough at the local news, you find an unsettling number of disappearances near that region. The official line is accidents or lost hikers. But David suspects otherwise. Some nights, David dreams of that final confrontation on the logging road. He sees the alpha's eyes glowing in the headlights, hears the rasping mimicry of a stolen human voice. He jolts awake, heart pounding. Because once you know they're out there, multiple creatures, cunning, territorial, able to mimic human pleas, how do you ever feel safe in the woods again? So if you ever find yourself driving a lonely road through Cherokee National Forest at dusk, watch for unusual blockades or storm debris that seems suspiciously placed. And if you hear a distant call for help in the night, be very cautious. It might be nothing, or it might be the call of an ancient predator wearing a human voice, hoping to lure you deeper into its realm. Once it set its sights on you, the only way out is to fight or flee, and you'll need more than luck when the biggest, smartest, and most relentless beast in those woods decides your dinner.